Hello and welcome. Today I'm joined by Dr. Dave Rhodes, who is course leader and senior lecturer in elite performance at UCLan. So Dave, thank you for joining. I've been hunting you down for probably about a year actually.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, mate. It's good to catch up. It'd be good to have a chat.
Absolutely. So Dave, again, I've known you for a long time. It's hard to believe, 10 years ago that we were sort of playing football together. But like, where are you from originally? I've never actually found out much about you as a person.
Well, I'm Preston boy. Born in Preston, living back in Preston again, but obviously went to school in Preston. So Preston through and through, really. Still here now, but we'll see where we end up in the next decade.
So, are you a Preston North End fan then?
Yeah, big Preston fan. Well, I was season ticket holder when I was a kid. For best part of probably 10 years as a season ticket holder, and then football takes over. You playing football takes over, and then that kind of stopped me being a season ticket holder. And then working in football, you kind of fall away and fall out of touch with it a little bit, but still watch out for the results and see how they're getting on at the weekend.
Very good. Well, you must remember the plastic pitch at Deepdale then.
Yeah, the classic plastic pitch at Deepdale. Very short plastic pitch. That was the 90s. That I think that plastic pitch was down, but that's seems like not so long ago, but it is a long time ago now. Going back to that, and I remember watching the semi-final against Torquay. Was one of the last games on the plastic pitch. I think that was in 1994, a playoff semi-final.
God, yeah, that is scary to think it's that long ago.
Yeah, time flies, mate. Time flies.
Certainly does. So, like, at what point did you start to think that you wanted to get involved in this sort of world that we're in now?
So I think it evolved naturally for me. I mean, I was as a kid, I was always football orientated, sport orientated. That was my only desire. My mum and dad would say that, looking at me growing up, I had no interest in anything else but sport. And then in high school, I used to blow the minds a little bit because I would switch off from every other subject except from PE and couldn't wait to get to GCSE PE. And then that carried on into college, where you find beer and girls in college. And that then knocks onto your studies a little bit and affects your studies. But the only thing that stayed consistent was sport. And then obviously I carried that into university, quite blinkered really. And looking back now, it was probably a very naive, but that just filtered into the career, really.
So, but when you were like deciding what you're going to do for college and stuff, then, so what did you have any sort of plan then of maybe what you wanted to do at university or what then?
No, it was always just sport. So naturally, 2000, I think it was 1999, 2000, something like that. It was like getting to the end of college, and there was always a big push for everybody to go and do a degree when I was at college, and I'm sure it's the same now. But there was a huge push to go and do your go and get your degree, go and do that. Don't fall out of education, keep going, and that was the push from home. So I went on and I looked around sports coaching, sports science, and sports science was the real one that really caught my eye and that I wanted to do. Little did I know at the time there was no jobs in sports science at the time, and sports scientists weren't really a thing then. They were just beginning to evolve, I would say. So, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the practical side of it, but it was that passion for sport and that love for sport that kind of drove me into that avenue. And I ran around with blinkers on, really. I couldn't see anything else outside of sport.
But did you always think, because I did sports science at a similar time to you, and I can honestly say I didn't even think there was a possibility of me even doing that. It was just like, well, same as you, I don't want to do a degree and I like sport, and that was kind of the extent of it.
Yeah, I don't think I thought of anything at the time. I was playing football at the time. I enjoyed my football. It was sport. It was go to uni, avoid work. And yeah, just you go into your degree. But I look back at the sports science degree that I did now, and it wasn't really orientated around elite sport or elite performance or anything like that. It was just about the body, a little bit about anatomy and physiology, and then some inference to kind of training and how we train, and that was it. That was the degree in a nutshell, really. Which I'm sure my mum and dad would be delighted in me saying that, and spending which were £1,000 fees at the time. I think I was the first £1,000 fee student. It was free before then, but yeah, I think they'd be spewing now if they heard me say that.
Well, yeah, I think it's paid off all right. So yeah, it doesn't feel that bad. So where did you study?
So I studied at UCLan. I finished college, and I was very much a home bird. And I didn't want to go away to university. And bizarrely, the reason I didn't want to go to university, I remember going to look at 3 universities with my mum. She took me. My dad was working, and my mum took me around 3 universities, and one of them was Leeds Met. And we got a tour of the student digs, and my mum was desperate for me to go to Leeds Met. She loved it, and my mum was a Yorkshire girl anyway. She's from Leeds, and she was desperate for me to go. And we were looking around these student digs, and I had creature comforts, so I had home cooked meals, I had ironing, I had washing, and I looked in these kitchens. There's mold coming off the ovens, and I was thinking, no, that's not for me. I can't deal with that. So I found the same degree at UCLan and ended up staying at home.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that sounds quite good. So where were you playing football at the time then?
So I was bouncing around non-league, really. I had a few clubs at the time. I think going back to when I started my degree would have been when the non-league days really started. There was the old jaunts of Squires Gate, Atherton Collieries, Bamber Bridge. You bounce around. There's a few clubs, but you just used to follow managers around back then. So the manager moved, so did you.
Yeah. And then so you mentioned about the degree and that it wasn't that specific to working in sport then. So
Yep.
At what point did you start to think that maybe you needed to do something additional, or what was your thought process as you were going through towards graduation?
I didn't have a thought process really. It was I remember just my first year of my degree was a bit of a farce really. It was like kind of you walked in day one and they said, oh, this doesn't count towards anything, so you don't need to, you just need to get a grip of the degree. So it's kind of like the green light to just carry on enjoying life. So I explored obviously the nightlife a little bit more than I probably explored the books. And it probably was close to getting booted off that first year. Passed by the skin of my teeth. And then in second year, the realization was, in 2 years' time, I could be needing to get a job. So kind of put my ideas up, probably grew up a little bit. And then as I started venturing towards the end, the peer pressure from home of mum and dad of, right, okay, what's the next step? Because you're not staying in education all your life, what are you going to do for a job? And at the time I was seeing a teacher, a primary school teacher. And that was kind of what pushed the first part of my career really, was because there was no jobs in sports science. I didn't want to go and work in, a lot of my pals left and they went to work in sport development or they went to work in a leisure centre. And I was already lifeguarding in a leisure centre part-time. So I was kind of like, this isn't for me. So I remember a very short conversation. Why don't you do a PGCE? Oh, all right, well, that can't be too hard. And, at the time they paid you fees. I think they gave you nine grand. So you were getting paid monthly. So I thought, oh, yeah, there's a winner. I can go into carry on education. I'm getting paid 900 quid a month for doing education. So I thought, right, that's great. We'll go and do that. So I trained as a PE teacher. And that led into my first job, obviously PE teaching. But I never really let go of the sports science side of things.
And so that, in terms of a couple of questions, so to start off with, now like you mentioned year one was, I can totally empathise with that again. It's kind of pointless, isn't it? You're just getting to know your mates and going out and doing stuff. But like, how has that changed much, do you think, in bearing in mind you're in academia now?
I don't think it has, in all honesty. I think what has changed a lot is how we speak to students and how we try and influence students a little bit more in terms of endearing themselves into a degree. I mean, my teaching experiences of academia started with sports therapy and delivering on a sports therapy program, and the importance of engaging in that early on is massive for your sports therapy students, because you need to hit the ground running with the anatomy side of things, which is very much a large part of your year one. So we try and engage them quite early on without being too detached from the real world as well. I think that, you know, sometimes we live in this idealistic world as academics of you will study and you will study 24/7. Well, that's not the real world, and people need to have that balance of social and academic side. So I think the biggest difference is I remember the first conversation that I had with a personal tutor at the university, and I'll keep his name anonymous because I still think he'd bounce around in academia somewhere. But he just said, he sat us all in a room. There's about 40 of us sat in a room, and he went, "Listen, this first bit of your degree counts for nothing. Enjoy yourselves, and you know, don't take it too seriously." So that was like the green light just to go rogue.
Yeah, certainly sounds it. Is that not one of yours and Mark's opening lines when your guys turn up?
Oh no, we don't do that. You know, Mark could usually do his spiel. His spiel of you know, Royal Bank of Mum and Dad won't be open forever. That's one of his opening lines in a speech. So he tries to nail them down to get him to buckle down early on.
Yeah, we didn't tell that to Tom and Jamie.
No, he definitely didn't. He definitely did. That's still extended, that bank, I think.
So that when you started teaching, then how did you find that? Like, you'd gone from academia again. Like, how old were you then when you were teaching?
God, 21, 22 probably, just 22. So yeah, I went straight into PE teaching, and at the time I was playing a bit of football and I was doing some sports science stuff, you know, just non-league clubs unofficially, really, just trying to keep your hand in. But I went into teaching as a PE teacher, and I got a job at a school in Clitheroe, Ribblesdale High School, and I really enjoyed it. I loved it. I loved being around people, and not being sat behind a desk 24/7. I like the variety of what it did, and I was out and I was physical, and you know, it's kind of, you're on the move all the time. But I found it quite repetitive teaching, and I know there'll be teachers watching this going and screaming and going, "It's not this," but it felt to me like it was the same thing every day, dealing with the same problems every day, and it didn't really bring much variation to me, and it kind of stopped exciting me a little bit. So I needed to look beyond PE teaching and what it was I really wanted to do with my life as I started to grow up and get a grip of things.
So, like, how long did you teach for then?
So I taught for, what has it been, 5-6 years. I taught, but what I did was I was a PE teacher, started in 2003, and obviously went full time initially. Stupidly bought a house as well. At that point, not knowing that I'd decided what I wanted to do in my life, and then all of a sudden I started dropping hours PE teaching. So gradually, it just started to disintegrate these hours down. So I started filtering into part time, and I went back and did a master's in sports therapy, and that's when really I started to kick on. Then, in terms of having real focus about what it was I wanted to be. I think my biggest turn off with the PE teaching was I used to work with a guy, and I think he must have been 55, 56 at the time. He liked to drink, the guy I worked with. And there was only me and him in the department initially when I first started. And I remember going home to my mum and dad and going, that's me in 30 years. I'm looking at myself and I can see what I'm going to turn into. And that was kind of the trigger moment where I thought, I need to do something else. I need to get out of here.
And now you're just doing that, but in university.
Yeah, doing that in university now. Yeah. So yeah, it's strange how it all pieces together, but I would say that has generally been my life, is that everything I've done at the time didn't really know why I was doing it. but it kind of all has pieced together gradually as I've gone through my career, which has been quite nice looking back when you reflect on it.
And so what made you gravitate towards sports therapy then?
So initially it was physio. I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a physio. I need to be a physio. Like, you know, I was probably looking at Leather on Premier League years, watching him running on him with the pitch and thinking, yeah, I quite fancy a little bit of that. And then, well, the more I looked into physio, I was kind of like, that's not me working on a ward, stroke patients, your pediatrics, respiratory wards. That's just not going to be for me. And the more I looked into physio, the more I was like, I'm not sure. Am I going to end up down the same road as I did with the PE teaching? And then I stumbled across sports therapy, and the reason being, I got injured playing football, and the club at the time used a sports therapist. So I went to see this guy, and just, you know, as you do, you sat in the clinic, you start chatting, and he mentioned sports therapy, and I was like, oh, what's that? So he started to begin to tell me what it was, and then started doing a little bit of digging around sports therapy, and it just appealed to me. So that's what kind of triggered me into doing that masters. And the biggest thing with it was I could continue working at the time. Physio, I would have had to given up work, but with sports therapy, it allowed me to continue working because of my sports science degree and my background leading into it.
Right. And as soon as you started doing that, did it really resonate with you?
Yeah, it did. It did. But it wasn't. These are my frustrations with sports therapy as a degree now. But when I was doing it, it wasn't the university side of it that was really driving me. It was the stuff that I was doing outside of the university, because the sports science stuff evolved. And then obviously the addition of the sports therapy stuff started to kick in, and I started working, you know, a lot of voluntary stuff beginning, and then stuff turned into paid work, and then you starting to work, and it was really outside and being around good people that really drove that passion and pushed me forward. And, you know, you work with some good people, but you also work with some bad ones as well. And I think that I've always been that kind of person. When somebody tells me I can't do something, it drives me on more to go and do it, to kind of prove them wrong and shut them up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so where did you go and study the masters then?
So I did the masters at UCLan as well. So I'd gone from UCLan to Liverpool John Moores to do my PGCE. And then I ended up back at UCLan to do the masters in sports therapy. Again, I looked around at a lot of degrees at the time, and, you know, on paper degrees, they look much of a muchness when you read them off a piece of paper. But the biggest clincher for me was, because I had a mortgage at the time and I had bills to pay, it was right. Well, I need to maintain some element of the PE teaching, because that's paying the bills. And this is, you know, commonly people use the phrase side hustle. This is the side hustle that hopefully will grow and become the full-time job, which is what it did eventually. And it tied in because the university was quite close to where I worked ultimately, so I could get across to lectures and bits and pieces that I needed to attend.
And then who else was on the course then? What was the dynamic of the other students?
So we had, the course was quite diverse for me, because I was only one of 3 part-time students. And the way that I had to fit it around work, because work was quite set days in university, the way university worked at the time was you get a timetable about 3 days before you started university, so you didn't know what days you're on, but I obviously had fixed days at work, which caused a few issues with the research methods module. But so I was part-time with 3, and then they had the full-time cohort of master's students. So I ended up going through with, I think I saw 3 cohorts, but very briefly was the 3rd one. Probably about 14 or 15 people that I would have come across in the time that I was at university. Dynamic wise, it was varied. We had some Indian physios that came over from India, and they did the course. We had 2 other sports scientists, and then we had a guy who was lecturing at St Helens College, which I think his background was sports science as well. So it was kind of a sports science lead into it. It was quite a natural thing, really.
And Who was leading the course from a tutoring perspective?
The course lead at the time, was it Andy Cunningham? It was either Andy Cunningham or Karen May, I can't remember. But they were the two main frames at the university, which Andy's recently retired now. You know, I think he retired about 18 months ago.
Yeah. And then, so once you'd done that over that period, like, what was your first proper role within that area?
It started in non-league. I started at Chorley Football Club, and that would have been in 2006-ish. And I started at Chorley, and I did a year there with Tony Eskeff and Phil Brown. And it became a balancing act then, because I was desperate to get into this. I could see this as my career. I was still trying to play football, and I was still playing, you know, a lot of non-league football and trying to fit that around. And then obviously work, and then still trying to study as well. Because the way that they shaped the sports therapy degree for me, I qualified quite quickly, which was over a period of about 18 months. I qualified quite quickly, but I didn't get the masters because I hadn't done the dissertation and the research methods, but that didn't mean I couldn't qualify. And fortunately, the SST were really good with me at the time. They allowed me to join as a member and get insured, etc., to allow me to work. But yeah, so it's the first paid job was at Chorley Football Club, and I remember it well. It was 15 quid a week, two nights and a Saturday. But obviously it was occasional Saturdays because I was still playing, so I was fitting it in around playing and still trying to play a little bits of football as well.
And then, so what, like, in terms of, like, were there interviews for that, or did you just know the guys, or how did it happen?
No, how did that happen? I was in a gym one day. I was in a gym with a player, actually. We were just training. And he was, oh, what are you up to? And I said, well, I'm just doing this sports therapy masters. Oh, what are you doing that for? What is it? Nobody even knows what it is. You know, good job. You're a PE teacher. Why are you doing that? Anyway, the conversation kind of evolved. I said, oh, what are you playing now? He said, oh, I'm at Chorley with Tony Eskeff and Phil Brown. And he said, but, you know, we're looking for a physio. And, you know, it's the usual card. Every sports therapist is called a physio. And it's bad, really, because we should challenge it a little bit more. But that's a whole other story. But, oh, yeah, we're looking for a physio. I said, well, and the first thing that came into my head was, well, it doesn't sound too stupid now. Now you're going to start tapping me up because you aren't looking after. So I ended up texting Phil Brown because I'd played for him. Phil had been my manager since I was 16, 17. So I texted him saying, oh, you know, I believe you're looking for somebody and I'm doing X, Y, and Z. And literally, I think it was that night. It was the same night. I'll come to training. By the time I finished training, I'd agreed to do this job and on a snippet of a budget of 15 quid a week. And out of that 15 quid a week, I had to supply some of the goods to do the treatment that was needed. So I was getting literally nothing. I was probably losing a lot of money in terms of petrol and driving around and all of that business. But I loved it. And the learning curve was massive because you were on your own. You were literally on your own. And that's where it kind of then drove me to integrate myself into professional environments and try and learn from people, which is then what I did.
So yeah, how did you transition into that then?
So the first one was with Matt Barras at Preston at the time. He was at Preston. I knew Matt Jackson as well, the physio there. So I got in touch with Matt Barras and literally just started building days of working at Preston. And really enjoyed it, loved it. Baz, you know, a great guy, great physio. Still speak to Baz now. You know, he's at Bolton. He's doing really well there. You know, Baz has had a great career as a physio, and it was just a really good environment at Preston at the time. You know, there was good staff there. It was it's still probably very much the same as it is now. It's a small knit unit of staff that got on really well and learned a lot. Just transitioning into that because you've played a little bit and you always think it's the same. You always think, well, actually, you know, we'll be in at 11 and we'll be done by 1. And it certainly opened your eyes very quickly to what it was really like. But yeah, it was a really good experience. Really good experience, that transition into professional football.
And so were you doing that full time, or was that still alongside the teaching?
So it's still alongside the teaching, so it's part-time stuff. It was all alongside the teaching. Everything was, at that point was alongside the teaching. And it was, it was tough because it was a lot of hours. But I don't think I've ever really let that work ethic go, because the hours are long in this career and the job that we do, but it's the rewards that you get out of it. The highs are very high, the lows are very low, and there's not much in the middle. But I think it's the highs that is the drug that keeps you going.
So at what point then do you decide that you wanted to do it full time?
I from the minute that I started at Chorley, it was like I loved it. I loved doing it. And my, I think me and my current wife, the present Mrs. Rhodes, were we just started going out at the time, and that quickly evolved because 9 months later she was pregnant, so that evolved very quickly. But she's I don't know how she is still the current Mrs. Rhodes, because she's put up with a lot of me not being there, traveling around for very little money very early on. But I think it was, kind of her support and drive behind the scenes that kept me going as well.
That's nice to hear that. I've never seen this side of you, so it's nice to see.
That's all she's getting, mate. That's all she's getting.
So what was your first job then where you were doing it full time?
First job doing full time was probably a role at. I've never really let go of any of the teaching, and the reason being is it's always sat there in the background, whether it was 1 day a week. So there was 4 days when I was at Southport, and that was 4 days a week. I'm
from Southport, so where did Southport train? Was it at Haygav?
Yes, they did, but then they transitioned to a period at Edgehill University as well.
Right.
So I bounced around from club to club then. So there was like Southport, then there was a bit at Accrington Stanley, then it was where did I go from there? Well, then I went back into non-league because I fell out. I lost the job there, and the job finished. So I went back into non-league for a period, and then I came back out, and then it started a lot of consultancy work with Everton and people like that, and that kind of then built up, and then Salford City came on the scene, and that was that evolved very quickly from where they were at the time was Conference North, where I was a day a month, and then it was started building up 2 days, 3 days, full time, etc., and it all just kind of. I think my work just kind of manifested into one thing, and it just blended really nicely at the time, and that's how it's continued to evolve, really. So
with the work with Salford then, as you mentioned that one then, so were you with them through their growth period in terms of like the United players taking over?
Yeah, so I went in, it was Chris Casper that contacted me, just off the back of a lot of work that I'd done at the time. Done some, like I said, a lot of consultancy work, where I bounced around a lot of clubs doing a lot of work just off the back of my PhD. And Chris Casper got in contact and said, "Oh, would you be interested in coming to have a chat with us about Salford and what your thoughts and your processes are with it?" I said, "Yeah, no problem." And there was a guy, Jamie Russell, who kind of drove it, and that recommendation came from Everton Football Club, some of the staff at Everton I'd worked with. So Jamie Russell had been a coach at Everton. He mentioned me to Chris Casper, then Chris Casper contacted me, and we met up, and I thought I was going for just a chit chat about thoughts and what they kind of needed in place. And lo and behold, it was an hour's conversation, and all of a sudden I'd been offered work, and they wanted me to go in there, and that was when they were in the Conference North, and obviously they had grand plans at the club. to be this next driving force. There was even conversations then in the Conference North for Championship football in X amount of years. And it seemed like a huge project and a good project to be involved in. So I agreed to do that, and it was a day a month, and then it kind of grew from there. So we got promotion from the Conference North. Then we were in the conference, and it grew. It just grew and grew, that job role, and it was very full on by the end of it.
So you can see it's really impressive, just from watching it from the outside, and it's a high profile organisation because of the ownership. But where do you see that club ending up then? Do you think that a championship is realistic in the near future?
I think it's ambitious for the size of the club that it is. There's a lot of money that's been invested in Salford, huge amounts of money, and that's credit to the owners and behind the scenes. They're driven obviously by the class of '92, but one of the big investors is a guy called Peter Lim, who also owns Valencia. And that money's still being pumped in. That I saw publicly figures were released last week about the club that they were losing 93 grand a week, and it's how long are they going to sustain that without success if they don't get that success? I think the trajectory of the club was huge, and it just went beyond everybody's expectations. I think even the owners obviously clearly very ambitious, and they wanted it to go to those levels, but I think it went quicker than they even thought it was going to go at the time. But once it started, it was kind of like a drug for everybody involved in the club. It was like, we want more success, like most clubs do. And I think they've just hit a bit of a ceiling at the minute now. It's kind of, they've got into League Two, and actually it was a little bit tougher than everybody thought it was going to be, getting out of that division. And I think they've finished 10th again this year. So obviously not done it again this year, but I'm sure that they'll be looking at it, analysing it, and seeing where they can correct what needs to be corrected to get the success that they want.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting one. And then you mentioned about the different consultancy. So yeah, I'm kind of going a bit off topic here because we need to go back to your teaching bit as well. But in terms of that then, so did that come about through the PhD?
Do you know what? People always ask me, like, how did you end up doing that? How did you end up working there? Even, Preston, Accrington, Stanley, Southport, Salford. And they all came purely from conversations, from just networking conversations. But now whether the PhD was people's drivers, I don't really know. I never really sat down with anybody and said, why me? Why are you speaking to me? Every conversation that I went to was never really an interview as such, even though it probably was in their eyes. It just seemed like a sit down, cup of coffee, a little bit of food, and have a chat about how you saw things. And I think that networking and speaking to people and those conversations, I think that's the biggest thing in the world of elite sport is going to network and speak to people and be around people. I think people just pass your name on, and you don't really ever know where it comes from sometimes, or how it evolves. But that's kind of how it worked out for me, really. It was never me driving it as such, even though I probably was unconsciously. I wasn't driving it, by putting my CV under people's noses.
Yeah, so like the consultancy, like for Everton, for example, like was that? What were you actually doing in that role?
So it varied quite a lot. That initially it was conversations around, processes within the academy and what was going on with that. And then it evolved to a big chunk of my PhD was surrounded by the IKD and isokinetics. And Everton had an isokinetic machine in the building, and I don't think they'd be. I don't think they'd be too. A lot of the staff aren't there anymore anyway. But at the time, none of the staff really knew how to use the IKD and what they were looking for and how they looked at different parameters. So it then quickly began to evolve because they had a couple of players in the first team that had quite severe knee injuries at the time. And they were on the trail back from injury. So I was quite heavily involved in some of those processes as well, and analysing and looking and going in, assessing players and seeing where they were up to and giving my opinions and thoughts around it, which was quite interesting from an outsider throwing grenades into the ring. It was it was an interesting time, that.
And that's how, when you say that, then how is it received by like the incumbent medical team?
They were great, the staff that were there were brilliant. I think there was a lot of transition at the time with managers. I think Martinez had moved out, and the on roll of managers coming in then was quite frequent. And then new faces, new staff would appear, but there was always a core of staff that stayed. The first team physio at the time and the academy staff certainly. So it was always very easy to work with those guys, but there was a lot of things and a lot of factors within the club and being released out of the club that then it puts a lot of pressure on those staff, and challenging that sometimes is a difficult thing, but a lot easier for me from the outside to be able to challenge that and present things on the table to coaches or managers, which wasn't always well received. There's a couple of incidents there, but it wasn't always well received. But you're doing it with a non-blinkered view or a non-pressured view, which is sometimes pressure, obviously, forces decisions that sometimes necessarily aren't the right decisions at the time.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of stories, but I won't delve into that. So going back to like starting in like university education, how did that happen?
Working in university education. That was a real bizarre one, and that was my first discovery of the great Professor Leather at that time. I was working in football at the time, and I probably had about 4 jobs at the time. I think I was doing 1 day a week teaching. I was working in football, and my missus we'd had our eldest 2 years prior, I think 3 years prior. So she was about 3 at the time. And I just saw this job pop up, senior lecturer in sports therapy, lecturer/senior lecturer in sports therapy, whatever the title was. And anyway, I dropped the head of department at the time an email and just said, I've seen this job. I've no experience in higher education, but I am experienced in education because I've taught at college, I've taught at schools, and that's very much integrated now with working in, elite sport. Would it be worth me applying? The response back was short and sweet. Is put your application in and we'll see whether it's worth applying or not. So I did. I stuck the application in and ended up getting an interview at Edge Hill. And I think it was in the summer, 2010-ish, 2011, something like that. And I went up for the interview, and there was me and another guy being interviewed, and this guy had been a physio in football for 25, 30 years, and I was like, I have no chance of this job. And we had to do a presentation. Can't remember what the presentation was on, but it was something around teaching a certain aspect of ankle injury or something like that. And I was, a bit blind at the time, and I thought, how can I do this? So I'd started digging over my masters, and I thought, what have I got in there? And I found some work on this ankle injury. It must have been an ankle injury. I can't remember the specifics of it. And I remembered delivering back on this presentation that I'd done for my master's degree, and I basically just tweaked a few things. And I don't think it was exactly probably what they were looking for, but this was a real kind of stroke of luck at the time, because it was later when I'd sat down with Andy Jones at the time. He was a great character, Andy, but I'd been in the job probably about 4 weeks, and the staff all sat in the presentations, and this, there's a couple of students in there as well. And apparently the other guy was just a complete egg. he just he kind of imploded in this interview. He was basically telling them what they were doing wrong, and going in and trying to run the show a little bit. So there was only me and him interviewed on that day. So by stroke of luck, I got the job, and I loved it there. What a great 5 years I had at Edgehill 5C. We had a great team of people, and I learned so much in that time as well. But it was, again, I kept that alongside the football and carried on working in the football, which is kind of what I've done since probably 2003, 2004.
So who was part of that team then?
So we had a great team. I shared an office with Steve Foster. So me and Fozzie were in an office, and I didn't know Fozzie before I went there. I'd come across Leather a couple of times from his days at Preston. And we kind of remembered each other, but didn't really. Leather was in the office, right? We were all on one corridor. So there was Leather, which was the first door, professor at the top. Then there was Andy Jones, who was the course leader of sports therapy. And then there was me and Fozzie. So there was just chaos down this corridor. It was absolute carnage because it was a very closed, short corridor. So there was all sorts of antics going on down there. Never did we have the door shut. It was great.
And so, in terms of that, then, did you see that was more the environment that you wanted to work in? I know you wanted to do both of them, but did you sort of feel at ease straight away in that environment?
I did feel at ease because I was always comfortable speaking in front of people. I was always comfortable delivering. That things like that never bothered me. But the biggest driver at the time was family, because I was having no time at home. I wasn't, I was out 7 days a week. I was walking through the door at 10 o'clock at night, and I was out again at 6 o'clock in the morning. I got a young kid at the time, and a missus, she was driving her insane. So that was kind of a big driver, was to kind of start bringing some of the football stuff down a little bit and pick that up. And I think I sold it to my missus at the time by saying, "Oh yeah, I get this job, I'll be able to give up football completely, so we can crack on." And I'll have loads of time at home because it's 9 to 5 and this, that, and the other, and that just never materialised. It never happened, and it's never happened since. I keep promising that I'll step away, but I don't. It sucks me back in all the time.
Yeah, and then in terms of we actually employed a couple of the students from the Edgehill course, because Mark was great in terms of recommending people that he thought would be not only good clinicians but also good characters to be able to. Yeah. So Jodie Comer, she was called Jodie Shaw then. She managed our clinic for a number of years, so she just had a baby as well. So it's kind of weird to see that sort of development. Yeah. In terms of the people that were coming through then, so are there any people from that what could you see where they were going to go? Because sports therapy was in that funny position about HCPC and what levels it could go into.
Yeah, I think at the time, going back to when I did my masters, mid 2000s, there was always this talk of HCPC, CSP, and you'll have it by the time you finish this course, it'll all be done. And then that story just kept continuing and continuing and continuing. And then when I started in 2011, 2010, 2011 at Edgehill, it was the same story, HCPC, CSP, and jobs weren't massive at the time. But I think it has evolved a lot, and there was always just that driver and that encouragement from the start. The staff were great. There was Lisa as well, who I forgot to mention, and Claire Farquharson. But the staff were great because they'd all had elite sport backgrounds, and Mark and Fozzie and Andy Jones particularly. There's, at the time there's probably 100 years experience between the three of them. Jonesy looked like he was 100, but so he looked like he could have had all the experience himself. But it was delivered, that course, when I look back at it, influenced me as a practitioner and influenced me as an academic as well, in the fact that it was so driven to do the job, and it was all centered around doing the job. And it only evolves when you start sitting on panels and going to visit other universities or external examining, that not all the sports therapy degrees are like that. And I think that's the issue with sports therapy currently, is that there's a real need for some real quality standardization, and organizations, I think, are very picky about where they take from, because they know what they're getting in terms of the staff that deliver on those programs, and what they're driving. But that said, now it's evolved a lot. You know, even in the last 10 years, the amount of jobs that are available now for sports therapists working in sport and elite sport and clinics and private clinics like yourselves, you know, the tenfolds, people do leave university and there are job opportunities there for them. So
yeah, we've got a couple of Leeds Beckett students now. They've one been with us for 8 years, one, two, and yeah, great, really good characters that come through alongside the clinical aspect. But the feedback was always amazing about, particularly Ed Chill, because I knew Mark and you and everything. But knowing quite a few of the students, they were always really positive about like the sort of the obviously the knowledge that you got. But I heard you were a man not to be messed with as well.
I don't know about that. I think we had very high standards. We did have very, very high standards, and that stemmed from the staff that existed there. You know, Andy Jones, for the standards that he kind of set in a clinical environment were second to none. Military background, and he really you could see that background of where he was from. The bed sheets would be folded perfectly, creases down, pillowcases would be absolutely immaculate. And then you've got me and Leather on the other side of the wall, being the elite sport and banging on the wall and trying to distract his lecture as he's going on. But we had some great fun there, and the students knew, you know, that I'd like to think that they knew that, you know, there was a time to work and there was a time to have fun. But I think we blended it really well. You know, there was loads of stuff that went on at that university. It was really good times. Really enjoyed it.
And at what stage did Mark recruit you for his own football team?
Oh, that was, I'm trying to think now, that might have been 2012, 13 maybe. I can't remember. It seems like yesterday that, but I remember when I started at the uni, he was always going on about his Sunday football team. You know, he'd be on the phone, ringing round, asking if people were injured, if they could play. And, you know, Mark being the typical, it wouldn't be the physio that you thought you had been with how he spoke to these lads on the phone. Oh, my hamstring's a bit soft. Don't be fucking soft. You need to be playing. Excuse the language, but that's what you could hear down the end of the corridor. And he bugged me from day dot of walking in, because when he found out I played a few, you know, semi-pro and stuff like that, and bounced around a few clubs, he was on me all the time. Oh, left footer, we could do with a left footer in the team. You know, he just give us a bit of balance on that side of the team, and he taught me through the tactics, and he sit us down, and Goalgate barbarians. So he pressured, and I stepped away. A lot of my consultancy work started going into the week, so I wasn't at games at the weekends. So he got wind of that, and he asked me to play one game, and that was away at Coppell, and that was my first game. And I can't remember the team, what they were called, but it was at Coppell United's pitch. And he said, "Oh, just play one game for us." And then after that, I think I played every game post that game. Right?
Yeah, I remember experiencing that, where I was just like, is he not a physio? Like, I could barely walk with a hamstring injury. And I remember you saying to me, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, I tried to say no to him, and he's just like, "What?"
Yeah. Well, I remember that first game we played, and I think I pulled my hamstring after about half an hour because I'd not played, and I pulled my hamstring after about half an hour. And I looked over to him, expecting, you know, this sympathetic ear, and he looked at me. He was like, "What?" And I went, "Well, my hamstring." And he went, "Just get on with it with no subs. Just get on with it." So I ended up playing the full game. We won 3-0, I think, and it was brilliant. What a guy as a manager. What a guy. There's some classic tales there. I think the best one for me was when we were playing. We were next to the canal. I can't remember where it was, but it had been. Well, there's two incidents with Tom and Jamie, his sons, because both sons obviously played in the team. The first one was Tom. I think he'd been out the night before, and obviously he was off cut, and he was playing on the left wing, and I was playing centre. Oh, it's left wing back, and I was playing centre half. And he's on the sideline. Every time the ball went to Tom, it was rolling over his foot. It was going underneath his foot. It was bobbling past him. And there's just this scream from the side of the pitch. Do not give him that effing ball for the next 10 minutes. He's absolutely crap. And then the ball came to me, and I just thought, I'm going to give it him. So I rolled it, and it rolled over his foot, and I could hear, Rhodesy, what have I effing told you? Stop giving him the ball. As he screams across the pitch. He was brilliant. And then there was the one with Jamie, where Jamie, I think he'd worn some new boots, and he got a blister on his foot. And at half time, we've all walked over, and Jamie was sat there messing with the back of his boot. And he said, "What's wrong with you?" He said, "A bit of a blister, Dad, you know, on the heel." He said, "If I hear about those bloody blisters one more time, I'm going to put those boots in that frigging canal." He was brilliant. He was brilliant.
Yeah, no, I remember the time I turned up, big mistake, with pink kinesio tape on.
Oh, that was a great moment, mate, that.
And he's like, fucking kinesio tape, pink.
And then I think you pulled your hamstring after about 2 minutes. And you had to go
like, oh no, what? But whether it was to do with it or not, but I literally did ping it. That was the hamstring problem. So yeah, God knows what happened there. But no, I mean that was good. I think we ended on a high anyway. Winning the was a big moment.
Well, I can see why Michael Owen had his problems, because we all had hamstring injuries.
No, it was, yeah, like you say, it's unbelievable to think that was like 11 years ago or whatever.
Yeah,
but
it
was good. It was very good. So in terms of that then, so how did you end up leaving Edge Hill?
It was a job that came up. The job came up at UConn as course lead. So I contacted the university at the time just to find out a little bit more about it. And I had spoken to quite a lot of people at the time. Mark had left Edge Hill to go to Bolton. Fozzie had gone to Bolton, which is quite funny actually, because Fozzie got the job first at Bolton with Jimmy Phillips. He'd had a chat with Jimmy Phillips, and he ended up going to Bolton. 2 weeks later, I walk into the refectory or the canteen at the time, and Leather sat there with Dougie Freeman. And he got, 2 weeks later, strolls into the office and goes, "Oh, by the way, Fozzie, I'm going to Bolton too." So they both left at the same time. Lo and behold, did Fozzie know that Leather was going to be his boss. But yeah, so they'd gone, and it'd been 5 years. I'd have been at Edge Hill 6 years, and I always get like a 5-year cycle in work. I always think you need to refresh yourself up after 5 years, whether it's a change of title or change of job role and you move on, or within the industry, or you move on to something new. And I just felt it was the right time to kind of go. I thought Edge Hill was going to evolve again, and it was going to be a new era, and it was kind of time to step away. And the job at UConn came up, and I applied for it. And I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do it or not. And I think the first day that I got in, and I pulled all the program descriptors and module descriptors, and I had that background of Edge Hill behind me for 5 years, working with some fantastic people, practitioners, and some of the best in the game, and I took a lot of knowledge to the university at UConn, and it wasn't in a great state. The degree at the time, I was very open with those conversations that I had with the deans and the heads of schools, and the academic leads who were my direct bosses, and yeah, they were difficult conversations because they weren't that well received. But I knew that change had to happen because it was a course on the decline. They weren't recruiting students very well, and we made those changes. And I think I'd been here about 6 months maybe, and I managed to start piecing the old Edge Hill team back together. So I got Lisa in first, Lisa Hartley. She'd left Edge Hill as well at the time. She was a big loss to university. She was great. She was like Mother Bear, Lisa. She'd look after the students after me, Leather and Andy Jones and Fozzie had screamed and shouted at them when they were stepping out of line. She'd go and put their arm around them. So I got her in first, and she came in. And she took a lot of peer pressure to get in, to be fair, but I did break her in the end, and she came in. And then Leather was the second one through the door after Bolton went a bit tits up is probably the phrase that he would use. So we got Leather in, and that's when the fireworks really started to begin, because I almost had allies to try and kind of drive change a little bit, and then Fozzie followed after that. So it was like the old Edge Hill team was recruited and back in the building. So yeah, we set up and we made the course really successful. Changed it from recruiting 30 students a year to 100 students, which probably was great for the university. But then you start getting fingered for other things like retention and retaining students, which then we improved that as well. And the NSS scores went from 73% to 96% satisfaction. So it was really good. It was a really quick evolution of the course and the program, but it evolved, and Lisa's course leading it now. Lisa Hartley, she course leads it now, so she's taken on the reins after I left it.
And then when did the masters, the football masters, start?
So that started pretty quickly, to be honest, because after Mark left Edge Hill and Andy Jones left, Fozzie left, and then I left, I was the last one on it and delivering it. So I finished that, and as soon as I left the building, it was shut down at Edge Hill. So when Mark came in, we were having discussions pre anyway when he was at Bolton, because he was keen to get it set up again. So me and Mark were having discussions about setting it up here, and he was keen to do it because I was here. And then the job came up and Mark came in. He got his little payoff from Bolton and invested it in Casa del Ken, he called it, after the chairman. And then we got him in, and then we just brought the program quickly, got it validated, and it's run since. Yeah, so it's been good.
They're really good. That's great. And then in terms of like what you're up to now, then, so I know you doing stuff outside. So you left Salford quite recently, didn't you?
Yeah, so I left Salford last summer. After a really successful 4 years there, basically a project from scratch. And we left with, never did we have an availability rate under 93% in the 4 years that I was there. And obviously performance was good on the pitch. We kept getting promotion. Missed out on the playoffs, one because of COVID. COVID ended the season, and the second season we just fell short. We finished 8th. I think we finished a point behind after a bad run and a series of sacking of managers. We finished 8th, and that was really good. But I just felt the time was right to leave Salford. I kind of felt I'd done what I went to do there, and then got approached by the old manager of Salford to go up to Motherwell on a consultancy basis there. So, which is what I'm doing, currently, and it's been great again, because it's been, I think, the last 4 or 5 jobs in football have been wiping the slate clean and starting something from scratch, and that's what Motherwell's been, and developing processes, setting up monitoring systems, setting up programming and how we train and what we do, and it's a lot of management and leading a department of people, and it's really good, and it ties in perfectly with my role now at the university, leading the D-Prof and elite performance.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. And do you have any ambitions, or do you know where you want to go, or is it going to be more like the other roles where they've just kind of happened through circumstance?
Honestly, I just think I've kind of given up now of going, right, that's what I want to do. That's where I want to go, because it's never evolved like that, and something's put the curveball, the other way. If somebody had said 2 years ago, oh, you'll be consulting at Motherwell Football Club, I'd have been like, where is Motherwell Football Club? where I knew they played in the Premier League, the Scottish Premier League, but I'd have never thought I'd have been there doing that. But then equally, I'd never thought that I'd be still in academia doing what I'm doing now, leading D-Prof students, because I was never the brightest button in the class by a long shot. And I never ever envisaged doing a PhD, and then I never ever envisaged leading people doing PhDs. And 40 publications later, I'm kind of now seen as a researcher and as an academic and somebody kind of leading in this light. And I kind of, it's that old imposter syndrome. You sit in a room sometimes and people are using a lot of big words, and me and Leather always refer to it as big words and bullshit, but there's a lot of big words being used, and you kind of sit there thinking, I have no idea what these people are talking about, and you have to go away and you're all right, okay, so it means this. But yeah, it's great. I love the people that I work with. I work with a great team, and I was very fortunate at this university with working with John Kiley, Chris Carlin, Dave Collins, people like that, who are outstanding academics, in the field, and obviously practitioners as well. And Chris has gone back into football because he's leading at France Football Federation now. So I would say I've been so fortunate to work with the people that I've worked with, and they've been massive influences on my career. Dare I say it, Leather being one of those people as well. But yeah, they've been a huge influence, and I've really enjoyed it.
Well, winning all those headers and playing centre backs obviously not affected your academic achievements. So.
I think it improved it, mate. I think he'd take claim for that, Leather. To be honest, if it wasn't for him, it wouldn't have happened. But no, it's not something that comes naturally to me, academia by any stretch. And I think I'm definitely a rogue. And one of my students said it to me the other day, and I took it as at first I tried to take a bit of a step back and about what he'd written in an email, but then I actually took it as quite a big compliment. The reason I wanted to work with you is because you're not a typical academic. And I thought, is that an insult or is that a compliment? And I actually did take it as a compliment, because I don't want to lose touch with practice, because I think if you can sit in an ivory tower in academia telling everybody how it should be done and how it works, but practice evolves all the time, and it changes year to year, week to week, day to day, and it's not a perfect environment, and you have to be in touch with it to understand it. And I think the students that we work with, I'd like to think that this is the case, because everybody within the team that I'm in now is a practitioner, and I'd like to think that the students actually think that we can empathise with their situations, and we can look at ways and means of making it blend better, and actually inform the practice that they're doing and help them rather than hinder them, and it becoming an adjunct to what they do.
Yeah, no, great. Definitely agree with that. Yeah, I'm trying to have a balance of both is absolutely the best way to go. So last question. So from a sports medicine perspective, any books, are you into reading any sort of books for professional development?
I love things like I've not actually read a book for probably about 6 months now, which would sound bizarre as an academic. I read a lot of papers, but every time I read a book, it's when I go away on holiday. And COVID's absolutely killed that. But I've really got into kind of the what's it called? It's the chimp
paradox.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, the chimp paradox was the last real thinking book that I read. But I love all the, David Goggins. I don't know if you're aware of him, and the SAS, Sam Middleton, people like that, through real extreme situations and extreme athletes, you would call them, because they are elite athletes in a lot of respects. Navy SEALs and SAS, and that hardened, just keep going and going and going mentality, and I love those books. I think you learn a lot about the mind, and I think one thing that I certainly have evolved in the last, I would say, probably 10 years. I think if you'd have spoken to me as a practitioner in 2005 to where I am now, completely different in terms of how much psychology plays a role in people's thinking, thought processes, want, desire, winning mentality, need to go again, resilience, all those buzzwords that we use. And these books that I do read now are all centered around that. But I would call them hardened athletes, in the fact of, the environments, the backgrounds that they're from. They're not worrying about 3 points on a Saturday. They're worrying about getting shot or blown up, and it's really, it's really enlightening of some of the stuff that you can take into environments as well. And one that I really took out, I think it was in Ant Middleton's book, I'm sure it was Ant Middleton's, where he talked about who you sit with and who you're around. And he made reference to a paper which I later went and read, and it said that you know in an elite performance environment, it can drop 40%. Your own performance can drop 40% based on who you surround yourself with. And it really resonated with me, and it started to make me look at dressing rooms and who people sat within a dressing room, and you can see how people can get dragged down and almost like mood hoovers, we call them, in the dressing room. You know, they suck the mood and suck the life out of people. But if you can mix that a little bit sometimes and get them around positive people, it's amazing how the opposite effect happens and it brings people up. But that was a really, I take a lot from those books and try and implement them into my thinking and what I do, what I write about, or how I practice.
No, definitely, it is really interesting. Yeah, that one. I mean, you can even me thinking back to say being at school, you know, that you would mess around with certain people, but with other ones, you're better influences for whatever that dynamic would be. But no, that's great. And yeah, David Goggins is absolutely insane, isn't he?
Oh mate, unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, what a story he has as well. From you know, from that, you know, the big fat kid ultimately, which is what he brands himself, the big fat kid, and he's just an absolute machine. You know, his stories of he partially ruptured his Achilles and then just decided, well, I'm not letting that stop me. I'm just going to keep running, and it repaired itself. And you know, it's just mental, crazy extremes.
No, indeed. Dave's been brilliant. Really appreciate your time. And yeah, especially now you're going up to Scotland every other day. So, you know, I appreciate you fitting me in.
No problem, mate. Enjoyed that. Thank you.
Good man. Cheers, mate.
Cheers,
See you
mate.
soon.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.